Has the pattern changed since then?
Very, very slightly. There's a few alterations, structural-wise, but what's altered most is that we do more spot welding these days than we did in those days with all soldering.
Do you remember doing things for the old steam engines?
Oh, yes. So
what sort of thing?
One of the things that sticks out in my mind is on the nameplates. One of our jobs as apprentices was to put the brass beading that went completely round the shape of the nameplate, and that was soldered on, and I was to scrape the solder off it after we finished, which was a laborious job. And all sorts of things on steam locos.
Great sense of pride in that, because you must have thought, gosh, think of all those train spotters who are going to be collecting names like this. I mean, a lot of them are now collector's items, aren't they?
The nameplates themselves, yeah, but in those days you just don't think that way. I mean, you're just proud to be doing the job because it's a family tradition.
We made all the chimney tops and brass safety valve covers.
Now, they were a sort of GWR trademark, weren't they?
Yes, they were a distinctive feature of the Great Western locomotives.
But weren't they also a sort of apprentice's job?
Yes. Apprentice did nothing else but the copper tops, valve covers.
How long did that training take?
5 years, the Coppersmiths apprentice was.
What do you have to show at the end of it? You had your indentures,
Indentures, yes. I've still got mine signed by
those?
Mr. Collett. And my father's I also have, signed by Mr. Churchward.
It's very much a family tradition in your case, is it?
Yes, my father worked for the Great Western all his life, and my grandfather before him.
Were you born in Swindon?
I was born in the railway village itself, in Barthampton Street, so it is GWR stamped on me.
Look marvellous on an afternoon like this.
Oh, certainly do.
Presumably they were pretty basic when they were built.
Well, they were basic, but for the times they were very modern.
My guide was Alan Peck, engineer and author of the Standard History of the GWR at Swindon, another lifetime railway man.
They didn't have running water for 20 years, although there were standpipes for canal water in the streets.
Why did the GWR build them, but presumably not out of the goodness of their heart?
Oh, well, they had to be built. This was a greenfield project. The works were 1.5 miles away from any habitations, so had to build houses before they could employ anybody here.
The only way of actually getting people into work
here. Oh, yes, of course. They had to come from all over the country. The tradesmen were not available in this area, of course.
A bigger house on the end here. Who lived there?
Oh, C.B. Collett, one of the CMEs, lived there.
This is one of the chief mechanical engineers?
Yes, he lived there.
The GWR equivalent of living over the shop?
Oh, yes, exactly. Just that.
That's the museum now, isn't it?
Oh, yes, that's the museum. But, of course, it was originally built as a so-called barracks for the single men, with about 100 flatlets in.
Was it all about just providing somewhere for people to live?
Oh, certainly not. It was very much a self-help organisation. Here, the cottage hospital, which was built and opened in 1872.
So it was a sort of, what, welfare state?
It was a welfare state, but run by the people themselves.
How much did this used to cost the people working here?
Oh, originally, between a penny halfpenny and 4p a week for married families. But even up to the time of the last World War, we were only paying about 1 and 4p a family. Well, this self-help, of course, didn't just apply to the medical side of the town. As early as 1843, a small library of about 100 volumes was got together by about 15 people. And the very next year, the Mechanics Institution was formed.
What do they do here?
Everything to do with the social life of the town and the further education of the men.
Presumably all this self-improvement had something to do with getting better jobs.
Oh, of course it did. Most people developed their careers by working at evening classes in this institute here. In 1849, the committee organised an outing to Oxford, and with tongues in cheeks, asked for free travel from the railway company, which, much to their surprise, they got. And this was perhaps the first use of free passes on the railway. This, of course, became an annual institution. And at the peak, which was around, I suppose, about 1930, 32, Up to 30,000 people would leave this town in about 30 trains. Many of them were specials to individual places like Weymouth, Weston-super-Mare and London. But the free pass was available to the workman and his family to anywhere on the Great Western Railway system.
That annual trip was welcome relief from this sort of work, operating a £1,000 drop hammer. Chippy Taylor, a blacksmith for 35 years, is, in his way, an artist. Having heated a billet of steel, he's now going to make a stanchion out of it for a railway wagon. He shapes the stanchion, adjusting the pressure of the hammer with his foot, instinctively coordinating hand and eye in an operation that's a lot more delicate than it looks. As the metal cools, it gets harder to shape. With an apprentice as his second pair of hands, he's working against time. Legend has it that it was the test of an apprentice to do this with his watch, without breaking it.
These, I suppose, would have been made in the blacksmith shop here.
All the lot. In fact, every apprentice must make his own tools. He would make all the tongs that's required for his job, and if he gets a specialist job, he would have to design and make the tongs to suit that job.
So these are tongs, must have been other tools as well.
Oh yes, swages, flats at the back. He must make everything to suit the job that he's going to do. If
All
he
of
can't
that
make
he
them,
learned to make in the 5 years
in
that
his
he-
apprenticeship. Yeah.
Easy to argue, of course, that a 5 years apprenticeship doesn't make much sense in the Britain of the 80s. But I'd already met men who told me that a Swindon training was once the guarantee of a job almost anywhere. Show them your indentures and you could start Monday, they said. Will tomorrow's Britain have any use for a man who can make a drop hammer, dance and sing? The King George V was created for a world where neither railways nor good blacksmiths need doubt that they were needed. In August 1927, the first of Swindon's new kings went to America for the Baltimore and Ohio exhibition. The visit was a huge success. Britain's engineering skills seemed confirmed beyond argument. Railway enthusiasts, of course, know all about that American triumph. That's one reason why they were getting wet on Easter Sunday. Whatever else the letters GWR evoke, they surely include some assurance about a past with values yet to be challenged, about craftsmanship, of machines made to last, and timetables not easily broken. An assurance that today's nostalgia is more than just a way of healing our memories. One other thing I discovered. Half the workforce at Swindon seemed either to have worked for the GWR or had a father who did. Great Western ancestry for some goes back even earlier than that. British Rail might reasonably protest that millions have been invested here, but a lot of equipment still had GWR stamped on it, and there was still talk of working to GWR standards. Take the wheel shop. There are, of course, a lot of wheels on a train, and they all wear out. Railway wheels have tires, steel tires. Here they're replacing an old tire and fitting a new one. Heat the old one so that it expands, cool the rest of the wheel, and the tire comes off. Next, to fit a wheel with a new tyre that will also have cooked inside a gas ring for half an hour. No very great skill is involved, but the teamwork needs precision. Everyone must do his bit, spot on cue. It's hot and it's heavy. Similar teams have been doing much the same thing since Brunel's day. This wheel comes from a shunting locomotive. It must be set down in exactly the right place inside a new tyre, so hot that its inside diameter is just 3/16 of an inch more than the outside of the wheel. There's a flange to prevent the tyre from slipping. Afterwards, both will be left 16 hours to cool. In 1935, when the Great Western celebrated its centenary, the company chairman talked of team spirit. Brunel was, of course, remembered. The company seemed set for another 100 years.
The Great Western Railway has preserved not only its name, but its innate spirit and conscientious outlook. It is gratifying to feel that this sentiment permeates the whole system, and that all grades of the staff cherish it and take pride in the part which they play in this widespread organisation. It is this feeling of loyalty to our service, which is to us much less a machine and much more a living personality, that has earned the reputation which our railway enjoys today among the public. We, within our community, celebrate its 100th birthday with affection, and with an emotion charged with an ardent desire that it should flourish into far distant years, renewing its youth and its vigour at each successive stage of its progress.
The end was nearer than he thought. In 1948, the GWR was nationalised. Officially then, whether its spirit lived on or not, the GWR had been dead for 37 years when the 150th anniversary celebrations took place. It's one of the ironies of the 80s that they prompted more interest than the centenary of 1935. The magic of a big steam locomotive seems more potent than ever. We filmed for 3 days in May, not knowing that the following week British Rail Engineering would announce the closure of the Swindon Works by March 1986.